what you all wanted to do when you were a child. Most people had an idea. Sometimes it was the idea of your parents, what they wanted you to be. And sometimes it was the thing that made you want to get up in the morning. Now for me, I always wanted to be a rock star. I was influenced by Ricky Nelson at an early age, and that really sounded like a great idea. But in practice, I came to realize it wasn't a good idea for me. I'll show you some of what I've done, and it's such a ridiculously long list that I just thought I'd put it up on the screen because I couldn't believe it after I put it together. We're not done yet. I was amazed when I started looking at it to think, seriously, I've done all this? But yes, I have, and some of it I still do. I don't climb poles anymore. I've wired entire electrical buildings, just big commercial buildings, and I actually forgot about that, and I was a broadcast TV cameraman, an incident commander for the emergency response team, among other things. So it amazes me when I start thinking about some of this. These are the businesses I've owned over the years, starting in 1975 after I left Motown Records, and decided, really, I do better working for myself than being in corporate America. I just don't do well taking orders from others. Probably not the best reason, and certainly not the best reason according to a business consultant that I talked to. He said, the worst reason for being in business is because you don't want to be told what to do, and I said, I think we're in trouble. Because that's my reason. So, this is one of those little nuances that most people don't get to see, because I really want to see the shirts most of the time. And there's a story for that, but we'll get to it. So, I think all of us can agree when it comes to wanting a career, it's best to have realistic expectations. And a lot of us have tried things that didn't work out, I certainly have. And that's how I discovered that I needed to work for myself. And I wanted to be a rock star, but somewhere in the mid-70s, I realized that I had a whole bunch of friends who were amazingly great guitarists, playing in bands, making some actual money, but painting houses and washing dishes and doing roofing so they could afford to play music. And that simply was not physically wise for me, because I was never going to be anywhere nearly that good. But what I did find is that I have what's known in the business is called golden ears. Or I did before all the hearing loss anyway. I hear nuances that other people don't, and so for me as a recording engineer, that was a real asset. And it got me some really nice gigs over time. So that was what I did from 1975 through 1992 when I finally decided rock and roll had been fun for 20 years, but I was over it. And one of the things that I have just never had control over, and don't ask me why, is the fact that I just need to change what I do periodically. I hit it as the man in the maze. I've worn that since 1998 when I discovered it in Sedona, Arizona, because it is my life. My life is headed in one direction for an extended time, and it's changed again. And this is man's journey through life, woman's journey through life, anyone's journey through life. You don't always do the same thing. Most of us make changes. Sometimes we do it intentionally, and sometimes they're forced upon us. Both of those things have happened to me. And I have to say, I wouldn't have made a lot of changes. The first place I lived was a tiny town in south central Oregon with a population of 150. And I really enjoyed this little town. I mean, I had friends, and it was everything we needed. My mother cooked on a wood-burning stove. And when you wanted a chicken for dinner, you walked down the street about a block to the old man that had a chicken farm in his yard. And you'd point out the chicken you wanted. He'd snatch it up by the legs, smack it down on the stump, and with one swift, just effortless motion with a hatchet, chop off the head, and the head would go in one direction and the chicken would go in the other for a few seconds. And when it stopped, he'd wrap it up in newspaper and hand it to you. This was dinner. So it's a brutal procedure, but I learned how you prepare a chicken from scratch. Not exactly appealing to a lifelong vegetarian, by the way. Predominantly, I have fond memories of my childhood. My kindergarten was Miss Pat's School of Dance. Seriously. and I have yet to find a valuable use for having learned the Charleston. I went to first and second grade in Medford, Oregon, and then we moved to a slightly larger home the other side of town, and I went to third and fourth grade public schools until one day I got a report card that gave me a failing grade in reading. And my parents promptly trotted me right down to the school for a conference with my teacher, who said, he's the best reader in the class, but I won't give him an A because he won't jump when I tell him to jump. Sort of my career. My parents promptly trotted me off to the Catholic school and enrolled me. Now I have to say, in the overall scheme of things, I have predominantly fond memories of Catholic school. We had a pretty good arrangement because they wanted me to learn and I wanted to learn, and so, all things considered, I was fairly content with it. They weren't all great days. Anybody who's spent any time in Catholic school knows this. But in the overall scheme of things, I'm happier than some of my classmates that I'm still in touch with. Art has always been part of my career. But science has always held a steady interest for me. At the age of around 6, we had a high school kid who lived down the street about 2 houses that got me interested in chemistry. And that was my first love for years. Experimenting, studying, and blowing things up. Who doesn't? And I used to scale a 14-foot fence into the high school dump to get the discarded glassware from my little lab in the garage, because it didn't cost me anything that way, and I didn't have a big budget at the age of 9. So I had a pretty good lab by the age of 9, and one of the experiments, if you can call it that, is probably the reason I've had my right knee replaced twice. My friends and I discovered one of those little lipstick lighters. You probably remember one of those if you're old enough. That was discarded somewhere in a property that had fallen down that we were exploring. And I thought, this could be some real fun. If we were to fill this with explosive and set it off, it'll probably make a really good bang. And it did, except for some poor planning on my part at the age of 9, not actually making the best decisions. I propped this up between a pair of 2x4s right inside the garage door and stepped back about 3 feet after I lit it and held my ears. Now, you might be thinking, 3 feet is not adequate. And you'd be right. Because when it went off with a delightful kablam, it shot one of those 2x4s right up into my knee, which was very educational. My babysitter comes out the garage door from the house about a minute later and says, I didn't think about this for a second, my babysitter is deaf in one ear and can't hear out of the other. And she comes out and says, are you playing with firecrackers? Close enough. So this was something that would follow me for years. My interest in chemistry continued until I was 14, but somewhere in the middle, around the age of 10, our next door neighbor who was a ham radio operator got me interested in electronics, which has actually been my life ever since. And I would order Allied radio kits and understand electronics and do all of the experiments and get to the point where I was really good at DC electronics. I really understood it. And so when I got into high school, they were teaching me the same thing in my sophomore year, which was incredibly boring. But, you know, there's always something to be said for having perspective, and I didn't. So they lost my interest at that point, which was unfortunate. But one of my other favorite pastimes, about the same time I was blowing things up, was to go to the Piggly Wiggly on my bicycle and collect cardboard boxes and build a big pile in the backyard, and then go run up onto the roof and hurtle myself off into them, restack and repeat. And you'd think at some point my parents would have said, we're going to break your neck. But if you thought that, you'd be wrong. They just never heard a thing about it. And on that same topic, when I was about 5, we were out in the woods on a picnic. And my parents would wander off in the distance, and for some reason on a picnic, I have no explanation for this, they had brought along, my father brought along a 243 hunting rifle. Now, being the kind of child I am, I picked this up and I shouldered it and I sighted it on a distant tree and pulled the trigger. And it goes off. And it sends me ass over tea kettle backwards about 3 or 4 loops before I come to stop against the tree. This gets my parents' immediate attention. They come running up to make sure that I'm okay. I was smart enough to sight it in on a tree and not one of my parents. And my father says, maybe we should teach this kid how to shoot. And that's how I got my first gun at the age of 6. And thanks to my father and the NRA Children's Program and Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, I was a marksman by the time I was 10. Learn not to shoot at things you don't want to hit. So these are only a couple of examples why I have no reason to still be alive. There's never literally been anything that sounded like fun that I didn't try. And so I've been paying for it for the last 20 or 30 years, but I've had a really good time. I started studying martial arts in 1976. I taught martial arts for 10 years. I was an avid runner from the time I was 26 until my first knee surgery in 99, putting in 5 miles every day before going. I just loved to run. I hated it initially, but I had a lot of fun in martial arts. My contemporaries included San Francisco police officers, Hells Angels, Black Berets, Green Berets, colorful group of people. And you don't run into it every day. I have studied almost every variety of martial arts over the years, and I can probably thank that, plus playing a lot of handball, for having had 5 shoulder surgeries. Nothing is without a price. One of the things that was just incredibly valuable to me and my brothers, my father could literally build or fix anything. He had a lot of manual dexterity and talent. And that was something that all 4 of us brothers absorbed by osmosis. We weren't necessarily taught this, but it was assumed you could build or fix anything. So those have been incredibly useful tools. And that, coupled with my interest in electronics, has been very versatile and useful for me. Also, always enabling me to turn my craft into income. Catholic school, we did a lot of writing. We wrote for competition. We wrote huge papers, even in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And in the 7th grade, and I had excellent penmanship because if you didn't, it was painful. It's a lot of work to write a massive paper by hand. And I thought a typewriter would be a wonderful thing to have. And so my first job was selling newspapers on a street corner for 6 months to get the money for my first typewriter, which was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And it came with this great booklet on touch typing. So I taught myself touch typing. And it was incredibly useful my entire life. One of my most useful skills. How anybody can use a computer without being able to touch type is a mystery to me. At the age of 14, my father taught me how to develop film. And this was a turning point for me, one of those many nexus points in my life. Because being able to develop my own film made photography much more affordable and much more interesting, because you get to watch things come to life literally in your hands, images when you work in a darkroom, which I did for a very long time. And at this time I had a 35mm viewfinder camera, which is pretty mediocre, but exactly what I needed to take mediocre photos. A lot of mediocre photos. And lucky for me, my parents moved us to Marin County, California in 1965. So I was in the Bay Area from 1965 to 1967, summer of love, lucky me. Pretty hard to beat that. I got to see all the great bands, be in the right places at the right times, a lot of times. I have some great friends, including Janis Joplin. I just had a terrific time in the 60s, and some of my best friends were Sopwith Camel and Quicksilver Messenger Service and Big Brother. And so, Sopwith Camel were the people who first turned me on to pot. Hand goes up.
No, I wanted to ask you a question. Can you tell us a story about Janis Joplin since you mentioned your name?
What's that?
If you knew Janis Joplin, can you tell us a story about her?
I'm gonna save those for later, but it's too many stories for the amount of time I have. It's been an interesting life. During my sophomore year in high school, my view out my bedroom window was of the Marin County Civic Center, Frank Lloyd Wright's last building. So it really affected me, and that's where we went to study every day because the library is there. So for me, I had this view of this amazing building that we used to play in at night, run across the roof, try that today and wind up in jail. Back when you could actually have fun and not be on the news the next day. And it would always influence me in my architectural design years to come because I've designed many recording studios and done a lot of interior design along with the other work that I do as an artist. And so this had a huge impact on me, but my drafting teacher didn't appreciate it. I got a failing grade one year in drafting because the final exam was a house plan, and mine was octagonal with a central living area. Makes a lot of sense. I would do it differently today. But I know a lot more than I did when I was 16. But our drafting teacher was also the wrestling coach. Not a man with a lot of vision. But unfortunately for me, we bounced around a lot. It was hard for me to get settled anywhere because every year or two we would move. My father was a foreman plumber for a big contracting company, and they did large municipal buildings. Hospitals, jails, schools, things like that. So every year or two we'd move. I was always the new kid in town, which was not easy for me. I did not really have a lot of social skills. Not my favorite thing to do. In my junior year, I was working in Marin County in a record store, which was great. I got exposure to a lot of music I wouldn't have listened to otherwise. And this is where I picked up a nickname that hung with me for almost 30 years. One of my coworkers was up on a ladder stapling a poster up for something we were doing, and I was holding the ladder looking the other way. When he said catch and tossed one of those big boss-stitch staplers at my head, and I turned around and caught it. I didn't know it was where it was, but I turned around and caught it, and my nickname became Flash. And there are still people who call me that. I did a lot to get rid of that nickname for a while, but some people refused to cooperate. I was very lucky that I survived that little experiment. So for me, this was a good nickname for a photographer and live sound engineer. It worked out great. In '68, I took a position as roadie for the Grateful Dead, which was a lot of work, but came with some very interesting benefits, which you just might imagine. But the other thing I figured out in short order is that being a roadie for the Grateful Dead was a lot of work. They carried more equipment than anyone else. At that time, it was 3 tractor trailers. A lot of work. That's the first time I threw out my back was working for the Grateful Dead, setting up equipment. That was so. 1970, I moved to Los Angeles with my first wife. We were together for 2.5 years, which was roughly 3 years too long. During this time, I studied photography through a mail order course, which taught me a lot about darkroom techniques and not nearly enough about composition. During the same time, I was working for an electronics store in Burbank, which was founded by Donald O'Connor. We actually had one of those life-size cardboard cutouts of Donald O'Connor in the store. And this meant that all the glitterati from the big years of Hollywood would come there whenever they needed anything. So not uncommon to see Mickey Rooney or Jerry Lewis or just interesting array of people. I met some fascinating people that way, including Leon Russell. You just never knew who was going to walk in the door. And Lauren Green was also a regular, and the very first person I did a large sound system install for, which was just anxiety producing. Well, first of all, he's a celebrity. Second of all, it's the first one I've ever done, and I'm really nervous. And he's just such a nice guy. He makes me feel at ease and everything is fine and great, but I was just so nervous. Generally speaking, of all the people I've met that are celebrities, they've all been really nice people, just like you, me, or anybody else. And my aunt was Doris Day's personal hairstylist, and her husband was productions manager for Paramount. So I had some exposure to celebrities a little bit as a child, but among the pallbearers at my grandmother's funeral were Clint Eastwood and Boris Karloff. So after 3 years working for this electronics store, I went to work with a couple of my contemporaries, wiring all the big sound system installations for University Stereo in Southern California. And that was an interesting job. I like wiring, I'm pretty good at it. And then after about a year of that, I went to work for JBL. I ran their electronics fabrication line for a year and realized this is a dead-end job because the only people that make any money are the executives, and I'm not going to be one of those. So I went to work for Motown. Motown was looking for a new studio engineer, and I said, terrific, this sounds like a lot of fun, and it was. It was great. Across the board, everybody was friendly and nice, and Motown is almost entirely 50-50 black and white. It's very much a colorblind environment, except that most of the white people are Jewish, with the exception of Bill Ravencraft and myself, the two-token Goyim. If anybody doesn't understand the term, Goyim is plural for Goy, which is anybody who isn't Jewish. That would be me. But we had a great time there, though. It was just a lot of fun. And Stevie Wonder, when I met him, had just released his newest album, and he was autographing it for the studio manager. And I walk up next to him, and I'm looking up and up and up, and I realize he's no longer little Stevie Wonder. He's 6'4", and the man has the most amazing handwriting you've ever seen. I just didn't believe my eyes, and I don't know how he does it. But he's a really nice man. I have to say that was a really wonderful experience for me, and it gave me the opportunity to photograph some amazing people and events. So that's where I got started photographing rock and roll. On Christmas Day of 1974, my daughter is 3 months old, and I got a phone call from the studio. And they say, Barry's screening a first-run movie at his mansion. We need you there. I said, it's Christmas Day. They say, it's double time and a half. I say, when do I need to be there? So that's how I spent Christmas Day at Barry's house. I was there every day anyway, because I had to tweak everything. Heaven forbid Barry should push a button and something not work. He would literally fire everybody he could see. So my job was to keep everybody at Motown employed. Did a pretty good job of it, by the way. So Barry's house was originally built for Red Skelton. It's probably around 10,000 square feet. And he has a menagerie on the property that defies explanation. There's an enormous aviary that's probably 20 feet long, and it goes down a hill. You go in there and sit with the birds. And then on the property were 27 peacocks, 5 different varieties. I didn't know they had that many. 3 llamas, a small herd of deer, a flock of turkeys, and you just never knew what was going to happen. Not uncommon for a fawn to come wandering into the house. One day I watched a llama chase a fawn around the corner of the building, and then 5 seconds later, the llama comes back with a herd of turkeys in hot pursuit. Leave our fawn alone. Pretty cute. So it was a pretty interesting experience overall at Motown. I got to meet a lot of great people. And in 1975, while I was there, I was also moonlighting on a job rebuilding Ike Turner Studios. And Ike is not a nice man, but he does pay his bills on time, I'll give it that. So, this was after Tina had already left, so I never met her, but I'll tell you a little story about Ike. The name of the studio is Bollock Sound, which is a takeoff on Annie Mae Bollock. So that's how he named the studio. And at the beginning, when he was building it, the best recording consoles were made by Flickinger out of, I think, Louisiana, if I remember correctly. It might have been Alabama. Anyway, old man Flickinger has come out so they can negotiate the price of these 2 enormous recording consoles. And Ike spends the day with them, and they're talking, and Ike sends him up to the apartments. The studio has apartments upstairs. He sends him up to the apartments for the night with a couple of Ikettes. And the next day, he comes down to discuss, and Ike shows him the video of him and the Ikettes. He didn't disclose that it was, monitored. Surprising. So this negotiation changes directions immediately in Ike's favor. This is one of the many stories about Ike. But that's just not a big surprise to anybody, I don't think. Right about this time, I met Sly Stone, who was consulting on a Diana Ross recording. And Sly offered me a job in Marin County, and I said, terrific. I didn't want to raise my kids in LA anyway, so off we go to Marin. It takes me a short amount of time to find out that Sly doesn't pay anybody. And Sly smokes angel dust and snorts coke at the same time. Anybody who knows anything about those two products knows that it creates chaos. And it was really quite the interesting experience, but educational, like anything else. I have a lot of images of Sly as a result of a recording session that I photographed, and they are by far my most popular images, and I have sold a lot of them. So, it's finally getting even with Sly. This is when I started my first consulting company. And this is one of the things that I did for a long time, was electronics, starting with pro audio, fixing recording studio equipment, musical instruments for up through 1992. I started several businesses and did big sound system installations. And that was great until and almost during this time, I'm doing both recording and live sound. And it kind of got to the point where I was just tired of it. I'd done it long enough, and I decided, well, time for a change, and switch gears into computers. And in 1981, I was tapped to finish the first computerized house in 1981. This was a project that was amazing. Nobody had ever done it before, so we had to create everything from scratch. It gave us an incredible opportunity to produce things that no one ever even thought of. So I gathered up Gary Leo from Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's outfit, and my buddy from the Exploratorium in San Francisco, Stan Axelrod. He was one of my partners for years. And we worked on this thing for 2 years, $3 million, 3-story, 3,000 square foot, 1-bedroom bachelor pad on Corinthian Island overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Amazing project, no budget. I love jobs with no budget. You don't get a lot of those. In 1992, I finished the River Rock studio in Ukiah, and I parted ways with MC Hammer. I'd been working on his studio at his house, that $11 million white elephant that he built. I designed all the trick electronics, security and sound systems for it, and the THX Theater. And I just, saw the handwriting on the wall. He made $33 million in 1 year and spent it all the same year. So I got out just the right time, as luck would have it. Not planning, just good luck. At this point, I went to work for Symantec just after that for 3 years. After 3 years, I realized why I'd been independent for 15 years before that. Corporate America doesn't suit me. But this was a great opportunity for me to do things I wouldn't have otherwise done. I started out in tech support, they moved me into marketing. We had 3 people that split up the country, and I wasn't there when they made the decisions, so I got the Midwest. Never be absent from a meeting where they make decisions, because you don't have a choice. Midwest turned out to be interesting, though. Mayor's office of Chicago is one of my clients. Very colorful group of people. And E-Systems down in Mesquite, where they park Air Force One when they're working on it. These people have no sense of humor, by the way. So I started my first computer consulting company in 1995 when I left Symantec. And I had something going on pretty well, but I was not doing anything creative. Not music, not photography, not art, just taking photos to document time. Not really doing anything particularly interesting. And I met Karen in 1997. And in 1998, we came down here to see her brother who just been relocated here. And we were looking at houses and thinking, what's wrong with these? They're so cheap. This can't be right, can it? Brand new houses for $198,000. We're in Marin County, where, for that gets you a chicken coop. So we got back and we started to discuss this possibility of Texas. And we decided none of our exes live in Texas. This could be good. And so we packed up, we relocated to Texas, and we started from scratch. I started the Computer Wizard in Plano. I sold it in 2011. Karen started in real estate, she retired at the same time. Right at this nexus point, in 1999, we'd been to Greece, and Karen was my pack mule for a bunch of heavy equipment. Big camera and lenses and a video camera, and so we come back, and this is a smart woman. She buys me a nice 35mm Canon camera that's much smaller and lighter. And I said, there's a hint here. I started using that camera, and I liked it better because it was more compact and easier to deal with. And so we were in New York City in 2000 for my birthday, and I photographed the World Trade Centers, having no idea how important those images would be about a year later. And I was starting to get more energized about taking artistic photos again about this time. Things were starting to shift. But when we first met, neither of us were pursuing our artistic talents. And we have both been the best cheerleaders and influences on each other and enabling the other to be creative. So one of my observations is that everyone needs to create something to feel complete. And I don't care if it's art, photography, gardening, cooking, bonsai trees, whatever it is, something you can point to, a book, and say, I did that. It's an extension of ourselves that outlives us, hopefully. So it could be metalworking, woodworking, anything. And in 2006, as we cruise along, I had an epiphany that I had wasted too much time not really examining my creative potential, and I started taking my cameras everywhere, which is also when I started collecting the photos for the book. It took a total of 4 years to gather all the photos for the book. At the same time, I'm now shooting fashion and glamour again, and live performances, rock and roll, and just thoroughly enjoying myself. And Karen has a permanent dent in her forehead from me slamming on the brakes as we're carrying down a highway at 65 miles an hour, and I see something off in the corner of my eye that I've got to photograph. So I hit the brakes, slide off the side of the road in a cloud of dust and gravel, and Karen is grabbing the dashboard. And then trot back to go get this one shot that you can only get from that angle at that particular point in time, because I figured out if you don't get it then, you'll never get it. So you feel free to ask Karen about that. She's told that story a lot more than I have. So the book idea had been percolating for a while. And I had put together a demo of one, a dummy, on Blurb, which is a great place for building your own books if you want. And a lot of people liked it, but who knows? You decide you're going to build something like this and release it and publish it. This is a leap of faith at best. And to produce 3,000 of them borders on insanity. But I just had a feeling that was going to work. So, but I didn't know until after we took delivery of several tons of books that the average person that produces a coffee table book sells 10 copies. And most of them to their mother. So we were incredibly gratified at the response to the book. We sold the first 3,000 copies in 3.5 years, and we reprinted in 2018. Over the last 2 decades, I have shot for most of the newspapers in the area, a number of magazines, a magazine in Canada, and my specialty is architecture, but I love photojournalism. I just love telling a story with one image. My biggest commission project to date was for Delta Airlines in 2017. I got a phone call while we were in Taiwan, and they had seen a backdrop I'd done for a local television station of a large Dallas skyline. They wanted something similar, but a lot bigger, 26 feet wide by 6 feet high. A combination skyline of Dallas and Fort Worth. So I said, I'm going to need to reshoot some things. So I went out and reshot the buildings I needed. And this was for their call center at DFW. And for the unveiling, I thought I was supposed to just show up and sign the thing on the wall and terrific, take the shield off it so we could see it. Nobody had seen it, including me. And then I find out that I'm the guest of honor and expected to speak. Okay then. All right, we'll make that work. In the overall scheme of things, I feel like I've generally led a charmed life. I've just had a really good time. Sure, I'd probably change a few things, but everything has led to where I am today. I like where I am today. I've had fun. I've had a lot of people tell me they paid good money to do what I've done. And my answer is always, I don't know how good an investment that would be, but I've had a great time. All the images you see in my slideshow that's coming up are photos I took. Unless I'm in them, of course. The slideshow runs for about 16 minutes. If you have any questions, let me know afterwards. I'm also available to sign books later. I'm going to run a little slideshow here for you, and they're annotated, but I'll talk